Hello, everybody. I do believe that we have the waiting room inside now. Good morning. Well, good morning and good afternoon, because I know we're joined by individuals all over the Caribbean. So I wanted to formally welcome you all and say Happy International Day of Mangroves. I think we're just gonna give everyone else maybe 2 more minutes to see if there's any other participants trickling in before we officially start. So maybe 1 more minute. And then we'll just keep everyone's muted for the time being and for the duration. Um, I'll switch between presenters, and then if anyone has any questions as we go along, you could either put it in the chat or just hold on to it to the end of the discussion, and then we'll kind of have a Q&A segment as well to close out. Just 1 more minute. Okay, well, I think we can officially start. So hello again. I want to officially welcome everyone to the second installment of this webinar series by Biodiversity Matters. It is the Global Youth Biodiversity Network's second installment. And of course, very fitting considering today is the International Day of Mangrove. So my name is Carolee Chanona. I am the country representative for Belize of the GYBN's Caribbean chapter, which, as many of you may already know, is a youth-led organization that provides environmental advocates like everyone probably here a platform for conservation matters, topics, and really just getting the youths involved in policymaking, decision making, and just, having our voices heard. So today's webinar is a great example of that. Like I mentioned, it's World Mangrove Day, and we'll be discussing the importance of our coastal ecosystems and learn more about the ongoing regional efforts to protect them. So we have reps from all over today. We have three very important ones that will be sharing on their point of view and what that looks like for their scope. So I will go ahead and introduce everyone ahead of time. And then, like I mentioned, we'll just have everyone stay muted to post a brief discussion after. So if you do have any questions that come up, you could either put it in the chat or we'll put them in after. So our first presenter is Mr. Ruleo Camacho. So hailing from Falmouth Village in Antigua and Barbuda, Mr. Camacho has a deep-rooted passion for marine conservation, shaped by the time spent sailing, fishing, and diving during his younger years. Dedicated to protecting marine ecosystems, Mr. Camacho's work focuses on the critical linkages between mangrove wetlands, seagrass beds, and coral reef ecosystems. Through marine research, engaging presentations, and interactive social media content, Mr. Camacho educates and inspires audiences from kids to professionals. And as an advocate for environmental stewardship, he leverages his expertise and platform to drive impactful change. And so I think it would be a great opportunity to hear and see his presentation today. So I'll pass the floor over to you, Julio.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you once again, GYBN, for having me. Looking forward to this. So just to get straight into it, my presentation is really talking about protecting coastal ecosystems for coastal resilience, again, in the Ruleo Camacho. And so, first of all, like, who am I? Why should you listen to me? Where's my experiences coming from? So, as I said, I'm a marine ecologist, and my focus is primarily on looking at the health of the marine ecosystems for management and research. I'm from Falmouth. I think my passions for this field came about from how I was raised. So I'm a sailor, I'm a fisherman, I'm a diver. Being in the marine environment was always a natural thing for me. and the ability to combine it with science was, just a career opportunity that I couldn't miss. For us other Caribbean folks, I went to the University of West Indies Jamaica campus, Mona campus, so did my bachelor's there, and then I did a double master's in the University of Maine. And most of my work is currently done at the Antigua and Barbuda National Park Authority through the Nelson Dockyard National Park. So a lot of the work that I'll talk about is happening within this area, so it's highlighted by the yellow boundaries. If you know anything about Antigua, this is on the southern side of the island, and you can see that there's quite a bit of marine ecosystems, both coral reefs, seagrass, and mangrove wetlands within this area. And a lot of my work focuses on how do we effectively manage this and the coastal areas within it, and how do we effectively ensure that the coastal communities and other aspects are protected. But I also do work throughout the rest of Antigua and Barbuda, as well as some regional work, and I'll touch a bit on those too. So my focus today is going to be on the Trinity. And the reason being is that when you think about marine ecosystems in the Caribbean, you really have to think about the interconnectivity and the linkages between mangrove wetlands, seagrass beds, and coral reefs. And there's really this dynamic relationship between these three systems. And I think oftentimes when we look at marine management, we look at coastal resilience, we look at these systems in isolation, when really and truly their management dictates that they have to be done in an inclusive way. So mangrove wetlands are critical for seagrass beds and coral reefs. Seagrass beds are critical for mangroves and coral reefs. Coral reefs are critical for seagrass beds and mangroves. And it's the same thing when you think about coastal resilience, and especially when you think about the human factor, is these ecosystems in tandem, these three ecosystems in tandem, it's what really drives the protection and the benefits that we get from it. So I think that's one of the main things that I want to put out there, is how important it is to look at the management of these systems together. Some of the projects of note, especially regarding this topic, that I want to touch on is, so again, National Park Authority, the NP, we actually did one of the first mangrove wetland assessments where we use both spatial data, so using drones to map out the actual physical location, but combining that with some in situ assessments, really to get an idea of how the health and extent of the mangrove wetlands within the Nelson Dockyard National Park, also pairing that with historical data from the 1940s to understand how the size distribution of these systems have changed. And from that project, there's quite a bit of knowledge sharing, but also it impacts us a lot when it comes to development. So persons often look at mangroves as just a fringe and not understanding the wetlands that are important. So it's important in that aspect. And then also looking at future collaboration. So things like restoration, whether that's actual planting or hydrology work, blue carbon and carbon credits, and some of the other aspects that have come out from that project. We've also looked at seagrass surveys. Seagrasses are important for harbors, but because we're such a tourism-dependent country, there's a very large yachting sector, so there's quite a bit of threats that are affecting our seagrass beds. So, we were able to implement, again, some of the first seagrass surveys, which establish species distribution, vegetative cover, type of invertebrates that you see within them, canopy height, and really understanding how that is being affected over time, so that you have to have a baseline to understand what's going forward. And again, looking at future collaboration. So last year we worked with University in Florida to do some core sampling to look at blue carbon within these systems. And we're also now looking at potential for carbon credits. So again, making these systems more important. And then one of my favorites is actually coral restoration. So we established one of the first coral restoration sites within Antigua Barbuda, the Nelson Dockyard National Park. The aim was to improve live coral cover, but the unique thing about this is that we wanted to test something that was fairly hands-off, especially in terms of the establishment, the area that's been done in. And so we're able to do this, set up a nursery where we've established growth rate of corals in our waters, use baseline reef assessments to understand the health and understand where these interventions are most needed. And we've had quite a bit of success, being able to respond to some disasters, being able to work with regional networks, and also our ability to engage stakeholders, dive shops, etc., and having them more involved in this has been critical for us. Regionally, there's two projects that I'd like to bring up that we currently work with. So one of them is the OneSec project. So OneSec stands for Wave Attenuation and using natural solutions of Elkhorn coral. So the whole idea behind our project is looking at coral restoration that's targeted for more than just the biodiversity impacts, but also how do you protect coastal communities and coastal areas, particularly given the impacts of climate change. And so what we're doing is looking at outplanting of Elkhorn coral in strategic places to reduce wave energy, particularly in areas that have been targeted by erosion and other aspects. And so there's going to be wave modeling, and the idea is to create this scalable model where, because it's being done in 3 countries that are spaced throughout the Caribbean, the idea is to create a model manual for applying this project throughout the Caribbean island chain, especially because, again, we're seeing, and as just seen with the passage of Hurricane Beryl, that these coastal impacts are very large. And then the IHO project, so that project is looking at improving coastal resilience through ecosystem-based adaptation. And one of the main stuff for us is looking at mangrove wetland assessments and restoration. And I think critically, what we're trying to do with this project is acknowledge that a lot of our impact on wetlands have not just been from the removal of plants, but changes in soil chemistry, changes in hydrology. So we're really trying to do that kind of in-depth assessment, an in-depth project which looks at how do you restore some of these systems and restore the services that not only benefit biodiversity, but the people and communities that live in and around it. Anything I say here wouldn't be complete without acknowledging collaboration and funding, particularly regional collaboration. So initiatives like AGRO have been very important for us because not only does it allow us to have a standardized method for monitoring our reefs, but it allows us to compare among other Caribbean islands, which really helps you to understand not only how you stand, but how implementations that's happening in other areas can help you, or maybe not the direct thing. So it's one of the groups that we work closely with. AGRO is also very responsive when it comes to diseases like stony coral tissue loss disease, urchin deaths, and what's not. So it is a network that's continuing to grow. BioPharma and CBF are both funding agencies. A lot of the work that we do is externally funded, and projects build off of projects. I always say that if you finish a project and it doesn't relate to at least another project that you're making, it is not a good thing. So we've worked with those funding agencies quite a bit, as well as the Nature Conservancy. The map that I showed earlier was a highlight from some work that Nature Conservancy did, and they've also been very critical in the work that we do. Challenges. I think one of the biggest one that we're seeing right now is climate change, right? The graph that I'm showing you here is last year, where we had the Caribbean recorded this largest bleaching event, I think, in known history. And the issue is that we're already tracking warmer than we did last year. So the impacts on our corals and marine ecosystems are large. But besides climate change, community engagement can sometimes be a little difficult, especially if you're asking persons to change established behaviors. There's always policy and regulatory hurdles that we have. And funding is a big thing, but in particular, given how fast we're seeing the impacts of climate change among SIDS, it's the ability to have rapid response funding, because we can't constantly be waiting the year, 2 years, 3 years for funding to come through. Sometimes we need something that can be implemented immediately. And then it's more long-term projects and greater participation, not just of the community, but also collaboration within regional and international entities, because sometimes we just don't have the capacity to do the modeling, to do the research that we need to have the data that's crucial for us. So that aspect is critical. And what we're looking at now is developing a relationship with universities going forward for that. So in summary, just to finish up here, so protecting coastal ecosystems, particularly when you're looking at coastal resilience, requires management of the marine trinity. I think it's foolish of us to think that you can manage these systems in isolation. And when you look at how they build off of each other, especially from a coastal resilient perspective, managing them as a trio is a lot better than managing them in isolation. Knowledge is power. The more information you have, the better decisions that you can make. And the more you share that information with your stakeholders, the more engagement you get and the more conformity you get. So knowledge is power. I will say that there's a lot of positive momentum currently with projects and the successes that we've had from those projects. But in the same way, we're having a lot of the threat levels are also increasing, right? So the impacts of climate change are getting greater. The human population and development is increasing. We're having greater levels of pollution, plastics, and what's not. So while we are having successes, we have to also acknowledge that the threat levels have continued to increase. It's important for us to address this. And one of the ways we do that is for regional collaboration, greater access to funding and capacity building. And then most of all, a greater empathy for environmental concerns. So on that note, I want to thank you for having me, and I look forward to the rest of this.
Thank you, Ruleo. I think hearing about the Trinity and that perspective of not looking at them as isolated entities really rings true for us in the Caribbean, just because as a region, that's how we need to approach resilience. It's not a matter of, oh, let's see what Belize is doing, let's see what Antigua and Barbuda is doing. But, some of those same stakeholders that you mentioned are names that I recognize here in Belize. So I think it goes across the region and it helps build it as a whole. And that's kind of the underlying message today as well. So thank you very much. Next, we have Dr. Rahanna Juman. She is the Deputy Director of Trinidad and Tobago's Institute of Marine Affairs, a government-funded marine research institute. Dr. Juman holds a PhD in zoology from the University of West Indies St. Augustine campus and a Bachelor of Law from the University of London. Through this capacity, Dr. Juman has been researching coastal ecosystems, including mangrove forests and seagrass beds for the past 25 years, has published in international peer-reviewed journals, and has authored 2 books on coastal wetlands. From 2001 to 2003, Dr. Juman chaired the Caribbean Sea Commission, and she's currently a member of the GESAMP Working Group 41 on ocean interventions for climate change mitigation, as well as the deputy chair of the Interministerial Integrated Coastal Zone Management Committee. She's also the chair of the National Sargassum Task Force. So we will be welcoming Dr. Juman and their presentation this morning. Hear a bit more about what TT is doing from their end.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So first of all, thank you for having me be part of this celebrations today, this event. It's really nice to be speaking to youth, because when I started my career many years ago, I started off like you guys, young, wanted to make a big difference, and I must say that I am blessed because now I work with a lot of young, bright people at the Institute, young researchers that are doing fantastic research. About myself a little bit, when, where I grew up in Trinidad is in the city. So, you refer to us as town girls, and we weren't very familiar with mangroves and the environment and so forth. And I used to hear my dad talking about going into the mangrove to catch crab and so on, but we didn't have that experience. But then when I started to go to the university, we started to visit all these places. And then when I started to work at the Institute of Marine Affairs, I think I've been to every wetland area in Trinidad and Tobago over the years. So, and I've seen how people depend on wetlands. I've seen how people live in wetlands, some cases, how they sometimes compromise their own safety because they need places to live. And I've seen how wetlands have changed. Coastal ecosystems in general have changed over the years working at the Institute. So I'll just go through briefly my presentation. Just let me put it on presentation mode. So a little bit about the Institute. It's a government-funded research institute, and we're mandated to collect, analyze, and disseminate information related to the economic, technological, environmental, social, and legal development in marine affairs, and to formulate and implement scientific programs and projects. So we were set up back in 1978 by the UNDP, but since that have been funded by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And we have over the years been conducting research, that's over 45 years now, conducting research and monitoring of the ocean and coastal ecosystem, inclusive of our coral reefs, our seagrass beds, our mangrove forests, beaches, and water quality. Now, in terms of monitoring our mangrove forests, you have a lot of technology that we have been using to look at changes in mangrove forest cover. So here you would see how the mangrove coverage have changed between 1994 and 2000. Prior to that, we would have already lost more than 50% of our mangrove forests because mangroves are high-priced coastal lands, and a lot of our mangroves were converted to expand the cities and build industrial estates and housing development and so forth. And this is what we have now, and this is what we have to protect moving forward. Some of the interesting work that we have been doing in the mangrove area is quantifying mangrove blue carbon. And we're using, new technology, trying to get accurate estimation. And you can see here from our preliminary data, how much carbon is actually stored in our mangrove forests, right? And interestingly, we're also looking at the storage of mangrove carbon in the mangrove soils. And from our initial estimate, we have 19 times more carbon actually stored in the soils than in the biomass. And even within the biomass, we have at least 4 to 5 times more carbon stored in mangrove biomass than in terrestrial ecosystem. So you see how important our blue carbon ecosystems are in terms of carbon, sea climate change mitigation, and not just adaptation. Similarly, with our seagrass beds, in Trinidad and Tobago, we've lost most of our seagrass beds. Again, because of coastal development, construction support, land reclamation, land-based sources of pollution, the number of issues that have surrounded most of the region. Right now, we only have Thalassia-dominated beds in our only marine protected area or legally designated marine protected area, which is the Bonaccord Lagoon Buko Reef area, which is in Tobago, this smaller island, which is also a Ramsar site. So we have been now accurately, again, using technology, accurately mapping those beds. And you could just see here some of the coverage we've had that we're able to determine whether they're dense, whether they're moderate and sparse. And similar to my colleague in Antigua, we've started to quantify the amount of carbon that is already stored in our seagrasses, another blue carbon ecosystem. And we've also found that there's, again, 75% more carbon stored in the soil than in the actual biomass. So it's important for us to maintain these ecosystems and as much as possible, have them not being disturbed. Now, one of our biggest projects, well, to me, one of our most important projects is something we call Marine Resilient Initiative, or MAR in Tobago. And it's about restoring and sustaining Tobago marine ecosystem. And this project contains 3 major components. 1, building sustainable ocean resilience, restoration of Tobago's marine biodiversity, coral reef, seagrass beds in particular, and mangrove forests, and most importantly, building that ocean stewardship, ownership, having management by communities, by youth, by resource users, getting them engaged in actual management of the ecosystem. And we're using, in terms of the coral reef restoration, we're using a different approach. It's using level-based propagation, where we would have been monitoring the reefs for spawning when the corals spawn and hoping to capture the gametes, encourage fertilization and recruitment, and then having this recruitment grow in something called a crib. And then once they grow out a little bit, then we outplant them onto the reef. And that way we try to maintain genetic diversity, as opposed to just doing the asexual or, where you break off pieces of the coral and you try to propagate. So this is exciting stuff that we're doing with the coral reef in Tobago. Some other initiatives that we're doing in Trinidad, only last year, 2023, we've had our National Integrated Coastal Zone Management Policy approved. For Trinidad and Tobago, we actually started the process back in 2012. And with the policy, we have developed a 10-year action plan for implementation, right? Coming under that, there's the Regional Pro-Caribbean project. Most of you, there was a regional project called the Caribbean Large Marine Ecosystem Project, CLME+, and that has now morphed into the Pro-Caribbean project. And under that, we're going to be working on developing a marine spatial plan for our west coast, the Gulf of Paria, which is the coast that we share with Venezuela. And this is the coastline where we have most of our activities residential or cities or industrial estate, because Trinidad is a industrial country, as well as a lot of conflicts among the different users, whether it's the shipping industry, the fisher folks, as well as the oil and gas sector. So, trying to create that plan is going to be pretty interesting. We also, with funding from the Inter-American Development Bank, we're piloting a blue carbon credit scheme in Trinidad and Tobago, again, quantifying blue carbon, and doing some rehabilitation of mangrove ecosystem, quantifying the carbon and looking at the possibility of using that to do carbon trading on the international market. We're working on a mangrove restoration project with another energy-based company in the central Gulf of Paria, Cali Bay. And this again is working with communities, because internationally it has been recognized that for restoration to be successful and sustainable, you have to engage with communities and with youths as well. Just recently, Trinidad and Tobago appointed a national sargassum task force, and we're working as well on a Japanese-funded regional project to build capacity to address sargassum onshore and offshore, where the Japanese government is providing funds for us to purchase equipment to look at the collection of sargassum. Through the Climate Adaptation Fund, Trinidad and Tobago has gotten funding to look at a particular area. It's called the South Arapuch River Basin. And again, it's the aim to increase the resilience of the river basin and the population and ecosystem to flooding, sea level, and expected increasing water deficit. This is an area which is considered sort of like a food basket for Trinidad and Tobago. And one of the major concerns we've had is saltwater intrusion that has been in fact affecting agriculture. And then of course, coastal flooding due to extreme weather events. We're also engaged in another regional project funded by the Japanese government, German government, and this has to do with prevention of marine litter in the Caribbean Sea. So a lot of work on marine litter. And finally, one of our other projects is looking at the marine invasive lionfish and setting up a lionfish fishpot fisheries project. So these are some of the initiatives we're doing in Trinidad that really helps us to conserve our biodiversity, our coastal biodiversity. But key to all of this is the public education and awareness, the engagement, fostering citizen science. And as a older person, I would advise that change takes a long time. And if you want to see things happen, you have to be consistent, you have to be persistent, and you have to be patient, and you have to stick at it so that you get the what you want. You get to achieve what you set out to achieve as a young group. When I started, there was very little information on seagrasses. People knew very little. And now when I hear people talking about how important our seagrasses are, I am so happy. So just remember that when you start out, it takes a long time, especially when you're working with the government. Policy time frame is long. Things take a while, but you have to continue at it. You can't give up. So with that, I say thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Juman. I think that is a excellent closing point. I mean, I've only been working in conservation for maybe 10 years now, but I think starting excited and exuberant and ready to go out and tackle everything, I think that's a great point, especially when it comes to policy, that it's not a bad thing to be excited. It's just a matter of aiming your excitement at something with patience. Just because policy does take time. And it's good that we have platforms like this today, thanks to technology, especially that we're united over the region and we could kind of make our voices stronger. So thank you for that as well. And then our last presenter for today on the topic of coastal resilience is going to be Ms. Nealla Frederick. So a bilingual professional with a graduate degree in urban and regional planning, Ms. Nealla Frederick possesses years of experience working in both the built and natural environments. In 2013, she began working with the Nature Conservancy's TNC Caribbean Division as the conservation planner for the Eastern Caribbean, leading the implementation of the At the Water's Edge AWE project in Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. For this project, Ms. Frederick focused on enhancing coastal communities' resilience, the impacts of climate change utilizing a hybrid ecosystem-based approach. Since then, she's worked in various roles such as the climate adaptation specialist for the Eastern Caribbean. Currently serving as a climate change project manager, Ms. Frederick continues to lead the implementation of adaptation initiatives in Grenada and the rest of the Eastern Caribbean. She works with communities and partners to reduce risk and vulnerabilities and enhance their resilience to the impacts of climate change by integrating ecosystem and community-based approaches into feasible solutions, prioritizing the use of nature-based solutions. And this also comes from a background of being an architect, if I'm not mistaken. So with that, I would like to welcome Ms. Nealla Frederick for her next presentation. Ms. Frederick.
Okay, great. Carolee, thank you so much. And again, thank you to GYBN for having me here today. And good afternoon, all. I'm just going to share my screen and please let me know when you can see it.
All right, it's loading. Yep, they're good to go.
Okay, great. Again, good afternoon, all. As Carolee mentioned, my name is Nealla Frederick, and I'm the Climate Change Project Manager for the Eastern Caribbean. My journey into climate change adaptation is a little bit different. I started off as an architect, went on to do urban planning with a focus on environmental and land use. And of course, there was a bit of GIS in that. And this led me to the Nature Conservancy, coming back home to ensure that I can work with communities and partners so that we can help build their resilience to the impacts of climate change and other impacts that they are facing along the way. So biodiversity matters. And why does it matter? Why is it important? I work with the Nature Conservancy, and if anybody knows Nature Conservancy and TNC, and our mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. Currently, we work in about approximately 76 countries and territories. Some by ourselves, some a lot with partners, etc. But our focus today would be on the Caribbean. And in the Caribbean, you can see from a map, we work in 17 Caribbean countries and territories. But today we focus quite a lot on Grenada. I am from Grenada, and our Eastern Caribbean office is based in Grenada. But our Eastern Caribbean office also takes care of everything Eastern Caribbean, 6 independent OECS countries and Barbados as well. And as I said, we'll focus quite a lot on Grenada. We're known as the Isle of Spice. We're known for our carnival. We're known for quite a lot. But important to us today is the biodiversity in Grenada, that we're looking to work with communities and governments to preserve, to conserve, and to enhance, so that at the end of the day, residents, myself, we can be better equipped to face what is here presently in terms of climate change and what is coming. These are just some facts on Grenada, but in Grenada, a lot of our focus is when we talk about climate change and our interventions, we work within what we call the Grenville Bay area. So I'm not going to read out everything on Grenada, but the Grenville Bay area is actually situated in St. Andrew, which is our largest parish, but we also have our second largest town in St. Andrew as well. So as I mentioned, a lot of our focus is in the Grenville Bay area. So we have Telescope to the north, we have Grenville, which is our second largest town. We have Soubise, and then there is Marquis a little bit further down. And as you can see from this, these are 4 coastal communities and they are contiguous. So whatever happens on the coast with one, the other feels it, the other is affected by it. When we talk about climate change and we talk about shoreline erosion, they are all facing the impacts of this right now. So it's critical when you think about them, because they're contiguous, that you don't work in isolation, but you think of them and you work with them as 4 continuous communities. And as they're along the coast, most of the persons living along the coast are also fishers as well. So no matter what you do, we're talking about what is happening along the coast, not just protecting the coastline, but also thinking about livelihoods, what is being impacted in terms of livelihoods, but also their homes as well, and future incomes. So this is some shots in terms of what is happening. So you can see we have houses and persons living literally at the water's edge. So it was really like a nifty title for one of our interventions and projects. But you can see a lot of the erosion happening, and this is in the community of Telescope. A lot of the erosion has been happening. We have a lot of fallen trees. We have sometimes during severe swells, you have the sea literally coming under houses. So not just the livelihoods being threatened, but you also have homes. And then of course, once homes are threatened, we also have lives being threatened as well. And these are some of the interventions that the communities have started to do to address the impacts of climate change, to hold back the sea in layman's terms, so that their homes can be protected. Another photo of Telescope Bay present. And if you follow my cursor, this is actually a drain that is in the sea. Now, nobody builds a drain in the sea. So years ago, this drain was actually on land. So there's been significant erosion along the coast, and lower down to the lower left, you can actually see some of the solutions, the rudimentary solutions that community members are also trying to do to stop what is happening, dumping bits of concrete waste, construction waste, etc., just to protect their way of life. Again, you cannot look at just the coast again. You have to think of this as a system. So looking at the reefs out here, and this is within the Grenville Bay, we have Telescope to the upper left where my cursor is. But as you can see, we have all these waves here breaking, and we have a fringing reef here as well. Now, because the health of the reef is not what it used to be, we have a lot of wave energy coming ashore, and this is a cause of a lot of the erosion as well. So when we're thinking about our solutions, we cannot think of them in isolation. So, okay, we have shoreline erosion, we're just going to do some mangrove restoration, etc. But we have to think of them holistically as a system, so that one actually feeds into the other. So when we're looking at solutions, it's not just one, but how we can combine them all to address what is happening, how we can combine all the solutions to address what is happening. So I mentioned the corals and the reef. This is just some stats on what is happening out there in terms of the marine life, fish species, and the coral reefs, the importance of the coral reefs. As I mentioned before, they do break quite a bit of wave energy. And if the reef height, the reef crest is not what it was before, if it's not what it was, then you have all this energy coming ashore, and that leads to a lot of the severe coastal erosion that we're facing, particularly in the Telescope community right now in Grenada. This is an infographic, so you can actually see we have the coral reefs, we have the mangroves, we have the houses. With all of these, you have your first line of defense, which is the coral reefs, and of course you have your mangroves and your sea vegetation. Without them, you can actually see the wave energy coming ashore, and it heads directly to the homes, the roads, etc. So you have lives and homes being impacted. So for us, we look at a pronged approach to our interventions. I know my colleague from Antigua mentioned the mangroves and the seagrass beds and the coral reefs. We start a little bit higher up, so actually looking at the upper watershed, and then we get to the coast and then into the bay. Because for us, whatever happens in the hillside actually affects what happens, not just along the coastline, but within the bay as well, because you have the farmers, then you have to think of the agricultural practices, the land management practices that they're using, and whatever leaches into the water stream and it comes down in the bay, it smothers the corals, they're dead. It also smothers the seagrass bed, they're dying as well. Then you have the sea moss farming, which is a sustainable livelihood option that is being practiced quite a bit in the Grenville Bay area. So when we think about our interventions, we have to think of them holistically from the ridge to the reef, and how we can work with the communities to address the issues that they're facing. So I'll just run through a quickly. This is one of the interventions that we do, again, working with the farmers in the hillside. And one of the interventions that we worked with them on is doing restoration ponds. So thinking about what is happening in the hillsides, and this worked well, particularly this year in Grenada, where we've had a bad spell in terms of the dry season. So this actually helps the retention ponds. It actually helps to collect the water during the rainy season that they can use during the dry season. But it also helps to control the flow of the water down the hillside as well. So you don't have that gush during the heavy season. And with that gush coming down, you also, and because this is controlled, you also don't have that erosion that is happening along the hillsides and the gullies and all that sediment heading into the bay to smother the coral reefs, etc. So this is one of the interventions that we do in working with the farmers in the hillside with sustainable land management. And then along the coast, we also work with the communities and some of our partners. And for us, partnership is critical. We cannot do it alone. So we work with governments. We work with governments throughout the Caribbean, just looking at policies and how we can improve upon that with them. Their NAPs, their sustainable development plans, not doing our work in isolation, but how our work can actually contribute to what they are doing and the reporting that they have to do to the bigger agencies, UNFCCCs, etc. So government is one of our critical partners. In Grenada, particularly for this project at Water's Edge, another critical partner has been the Grenada Red Cross. And this partnership has led us to another partnership which has blossomed, not just in Grenada, but other countries within which we work in the Caribbean. So one has bloomed into another, touching a lot of lives and livelihoods as well. But the Grenada Red Cross, if you know what they do, a lot of disaster risk reduction strategies, a lot of disaster risk management, and TNC with their science and with nature being at the forefront. Once we combined, we were able to do quite a bit in the area. And for me, the partnership has been really a really great one. Another partner that we've worked with is Grenada Fund for Conservation. So they do a lot of mangrove restoration, and they have been leading a lot of the mangrove restoration efforts for us. So they've been training community members in mangrove restoration techniques, how you collect, how you care for the propagules, how you plant them out, how you care for them afterwards. So for us, our partnerships has been really important and really critical for developing solutions and implementing as well. And I cannot leave out the communities, because we can develop all these fancy solutions, but without the communities, without their input, without them being on board from the get-go, we would not be able to do what we do. We would not be successful in our interventions. So they have been really critical for us as well. And when you talk about communities, I mean, and we're talking about climate change, but we also have to look at climate justice as well, and how that impacts communities, how it impacts the genders in communities as well differently. So it is really a holistic approach that we try to take, because there is quite a lot happening in communities, and being sensitive of that even before you get in there to do the initial talk with communities on what you want to do, and how that fits into what they see, the vision they see for their community is critical. So these are just some of the slideshows, well, snapshots of some of the stuff we've done over the years. As I mentioned, partnership is critical. Working with communities is critical. Working with youth is actually critical for us as well in ensuring that we start young, they understand the environment, they understand the impacts of climate change, they understand the impacts of the negative actions on the environment and what they can do to correct this. So we do these youth programs, they come out, they do mangrove restoration, they do shoreline restoration, they also do, and the photo you saw before, that was done in 2017, I think it was. They did mangrove restoration where we had like 800 school kids converge in one area, and this was only 1 year, a couple of days over 1 week. And 2 years after, this is what the mangroves look like in the area. The kids go back out and they're like, I recognize this. I planted this. This mangrove is taller than I am. They can actually see the prop roots coming over. So for them, seeing the actions that they implemented being realized and understanding, well, yes, you talked about the mangrove, the red mangrove roots and how it comes over and it holds the sediment. But for them, seeing is really believing, and it's really an excited time whenever we do the school visits and you hear them say, oh my God, I did this and I'm seeing this now, etc. And even the stories that they come back, Miss, I'm going to tell my dad, he cannot take the parrot reef off the reef, because of the reef building properties that it provides to the reef. So it's really interesting. As well, as I mentioned, we do quite a bit with kids. They do beach profiling, they get to use the drone, but critical from that is that when they walk away, they understand what is happening in the environment, and they understand that the changes and the actions that they do can also impact what is happening and how it can change or how it can be even more detrimental. Again, we work with fishers in the Bay, and we work quite a lot with the fishers in the communities. They have been part of our reef restoration or pilot reef restoration program from the get-go. So they've been trained in reef restoration techniques, and they go out whenever we go out and do a drive, they go out. They collect bits of coral, they do the microfragmenting, they come back, they have it in the little nursery, then they go back out again, and you put it on the reef structures that we are working with, the hybrid structures that we are working with to build the height of the reef. So this is one of our successes so far. And as you can see from this, and we've used steel, it's steel and cinder blocks. It's a pilot. We were putting it out there to test the materials, make sure that they can withstand the wave energy. Because if you notice from the top, the wave would actually be breaking on this. So make sure they can withstand the wave energy, but also make sure that they contribute to the biodiversity within the bay. So as you can see, we have bits of coral that were attached to them, and they're regenerating, and they regenerate. Some of them regenerate quite quickly. Some of them no, when you talk about brain coral, but you can also see the biodiversity here as well. I mean, there are tons of fish, and the fishers, while they put out the structures, they actually go out and monitor as well. So they come back and tell you how much lobsters they're seeing, that sort of thing, what we need to do better in terms of maybe shifting structures, maybe changing a little bit of the materials, that sort of thing. So our partnership with the fishers over the years has been really beneficial for them and for us as well, because there are eyes in the water, but they're also gaining all that skills in terms of mangrove restoration. So we just wrapped up a project with with Windrift. I'm not sure how many of y'all are familiar with Windrift, but they're the research arm of St. George's University. And the fishers, again, they were trained in techniques, but they were also certified as PADI divers. So there are a lot of benefit, and a lot is being put into the communities to make sure that we not only do restoration, but we also build the capacities of the community members. So when we finally walk away from communities, we have not only enhanced their resilience to the impact of climate change, but we've also built capacities as well. Some of the issues, again, facing, of course, funding is always an issue, because when you talk about restoration, you talk about large scale having that impact that you want it to have. So funding is always an issue. Another thing, and the presenter before me mentioned it briefly, is that restoration takes time. And when you're talking about nature-based solutions take time. So that is something that you always have to be cognizant of, but ensure that communities understand that, make sure that partners understand that as well, because you plant a mangrove today and it will not do the same work like if you put groins today. Immediately you have something. But with mangroves, you get all that additional benefits, particularly red mangroves. So you plant it today, in 2-3 years, you see it a little bit higher, but you have these roots growing over and they're trapping sediment. And then if they're in the water again, they serve as a nursery for marine habitat. So there are a lot of benefits that can be derived from using nature-based solutions to address all these issues. And with the communities, looking at what their visions are for the communities, understanding that, but imparting that bit of knowledge in terms of nature-based solutions, restoration techniques, conservation techniques, the importance of nature, not only in protecting them, but also in securing their livelihoods, is really critical for us. So holistically, when we work with them, they understand not just that bit, but also that all their actions, the impacts their actions have on their lives, their livelihoods, their homes, etc., looking from a ridge to reef approach. So I'm going to stop here. And again, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for having us. Thank you very much for running us through everything from your end. Ms. Frederick, I think the most impactful things that, or rather the most impactful image was seeing that drain in the sea to really understand the scope of erosion of some of these communities. So maybe it's the urban planner in you, but seeing the coast as just one part of a system rather than, again, something in isolation also kind of rings through that it means combining more than one solution. So, I don't know if I sound like a scratch record today, but again, holistic collaboration seems to be the underlying theme for all the presentations today. And I really love that just because it comes back to how important it is for us to collaborate as a region as well when it comes to resilience and really the next step. So thank you again. Next, we will kind of just do a moderated discussion. I actually have a question for all the presenters in the meantime, but also for all the participants listening, if you all have any questions, now would be the time to maybe place in the chat. We will also give an opportunity if you'd like to, ask any of the presenters yourselves after this one session. So this is like a little brainstorming moment. But just from my end, I think using nature-based solutions for resilience. I noticed in two presentations today, I think it was Dr. Juman and Ruleo's presentation, that you both mentioned action plans for blue carbon credits. And I mean, funding is a large challenge across the region for conservation, rather the world for conservation. But where do you all see the future of carbon credits for that trinity in each of your respective islands? And anyone or all three of you can take the floor and answer individually if you'd like.
All right, I think I'll take the first part of it. I think one of the issues, I mean, I have to approach blue carbon from two aspects, right? So first of all, when you think about valuation of ecosystems, right? One of the things that we've realized is it's one thing to say that an ecosystem is worth, mangroves are worth, I think, the 45,000 US per hectare per year or something like that. That doesn't work when you go to a minister who has a hotel development that's ready to go down. That information does nothing, right? And so one of the aspects that we saw blue carbon is how do you show the actual value in the way that they understand it, right? Because we know how important mangroves are for biodiversity. We know, like when I say we, the persons in this chat, the environmental scientists, we know how important they are for coastal resilience. But you have to think more of that at this point, given the challenges that we're facing. That's one of the aspects that I see blue carbon coming in. But also because we're focusing so heavily on climate change now, and because carbon credits and blue carbon have been essentially picking up steam, and it's fast being integrated into like the KMJBF and other aspects. And I think, as we've seen in these presentations, seagrass beds, the soil and the soil in mangrove wetlands are immense stores of these aspects. So it's ensuring that you can show, okay, yes, this is true, but we, in the Caribbean, I think particularly in Antigua, people want to see it in their backyard. So you can say that carbon, mangroves can show this much, but if I can show you, we did a study in this wetland, and this seagrass bed, and it's this important, it may stop you from dredging an area. It may stop you from backfilling, right? And it may show that this is how you conform to these aspects, while also saying that, okay, you're not building a hotel, but there needs to be some revenue generation because we're asking persons to reduce their habitat. So you now have access to funds that can help to make up that offset. And so that's why I think it's important for us to be looking at it.
Thanks, Ruleo. I don't know if maybe Dr. Juman, Ms. Frederick, either of you would also like to contribute to that question.
Oh, so the thing about it is that we're learning now how important mangroves are, not only for adaptation, because in the Caribbean we have focused a lot on climate adaptation, but we're understanding now that these blue carbon ecosystems also assist in terms of mitigation. And we can look at that as an avenue for us to help conserve those the remaining mangrove systems we have, and even enhance or restore, rehabilitate those mangrove ecosystems. And at the same time, look at the opportunity to provide economic benefits, especially to coastal community and the people who need it more. So when you're looking at blue carbon schemes or high quality blue carbon, you have to think about all the different criteria in terms of empowering people, coastal communities, but using the best science, engaging everyone in the environment, the local communities, and safeguarding nature. And while you use that to monetize and get some financial benefits to assist the communities that depend on these mangroves, you're also, again, as my colleague said, you're also providing all these other co-benefits in terms of nurseries, haven for biodiversity, creating alternative livelihoods, whether it's through ecotourism, whether it's through, honey production, and so forth. So it's a holistic approach and a way of conserving our wetlands so that they can continue to provide us with all these ecosystem services, while at the same time generate revenue for folks that need it the most.
Thank you, Dr. Juman. Okay, well, I think that's the only question I had from my end. Let me go ahead and ask our participants if they have any from their end. If not, if anyone else would like to ask a question individually, you could also raise your hand or use the raise hand feature, and then we'll kind of give you a space to ask or direct to each presenter as well. So let's just give everyone else a chance. Don't be shy. Dr. Juman also mentioned that she loves seeing the excitement from the youth. So now is the time to impress. Okay, we have where? Go ahead. Let's see. All right, so Rexy, if you want to go ahead, let me see if I could unmute you as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Carolee. Yes, so I do, well, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. I do have a question for Dr. Juman. Juman, correct? Or Human? Juman?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, right. So regarding the sargassum task force, because sargassum is a topic I'm very passionate about, right? I know in Grenada, our Ministry of Climate Resilience did make an announcement, I believe some weeks ago, on having a sargassum conference in Grenada. So I'm not sure, and I know you said from the presentation that the task force is linked to a regional project. So I'm not sure if you're aware of that sargassum conference. And perhaps if you can just tell me a little bit more about the regional project you were referring to.
So the thing is, there's so many things happening in the region with sargassum. And one of the issues is there's need for more coordination. So one of the projects that's being funded is 5 islands in the Caribbean. I think it's St. Kitts and Nevis, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and I can't remember the other 2 right off the bat. But basically, the Japanese is about building national capacity within the Caribbean region to address sargassum, right? And basically what it's doing is helping us purchase equipment that we hope that would work. Because it's one thing to buy equipment, and then of course you don't even know how to maintain the equipment, or you don't even know how to operate the equipment. So buying the equipment and providing the necessary training for folks to utilize the equipment both onshore and offshore to collect the sargassum, right? So it's not just about the equipment alone, but also in terms of the training, the capacity development, development of management plans for sargassum, and then also looking at how you treat with the sargassum after you collect it, in terms of how do you dispose of it, or how do you utilize it. So there's a lot of research going on in terms of how you use it and turn it into useful products. there are a lot of challenges being set out through UNDP, through the IDB, and so forth. You know, giving folks startup money to set up businesses or set up develop new products and so forth. There's a lot of research being done at the University of the West Indies, both in Trinidad and in Barbados, coming up with things like plant stimulants, bioplastics, you know, because we recognize because of climate change, because of pollution, sargassum is not going to go away. It's going to be with us. But we still have a lot of research to do because we don't know, you know, when it's going to come, how much it's going to come, if it's going to come every year. So even like if you're going to be investing in some business and putting in a lot of infrastructure, you want to ensure that you have the raw material. But there's still a lot of uncertainty, you know, because one year you can have a lot of sargassum and the next year, not a lot of sargassum. And also to some of the things that we have to look at is in terms of what is coming with the sargassum when it lands on your shore, because it could actually be bringing in invasive species that could have impact. So the task force that is being set up, that has been set up in Trinidad, is basically to have that coordinated responsibility for things like early warning, cleanup, research, utilization of the sargassum and so forth, to cover all those aspects of it. So yeah, that's about it in a nutshell. But in another in the region as well, you have the Cartagena Convention, and you have the protocols under the Cartagena Convention, and you have the SPOR protocol, which is specially protected areas and wildlife. And under that SPOR protocol, they have also set up a working group on sargassum, right? And there's a lot of work being done there. There's a lot of work being done in Mexico, as well as the Dominican Republic. So it's interesting. I think last year there was a conference, a sargassum conference in Dominican Republic. So like I said, there's so much going on, but there needs to be a more coordinated, you know, a coordinated approach to how we do things and how we learn from each other. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a follow-up question, but I don't want to take up too much time, so I will allow someone else to ask a question.
Thanks, Raheem. Well, just before I let you go, Dr. Juman, I have someone here in the chat from Tobago. They kind of just wanted to give their regards and say that they're excited to see the work and impact of the Marine Resilience Initiative. So just passing along some feedback.
Okay, thank you.
And then I have one question also from the chat. This is really for anyone that would like to go ahead and tackle the question, but it's understanding that we're busy currently with marine lagoon ecosystems and issues like sargassum, but with the growing attention on deep sea ecosystems, do you think that the Caribbean has the capacity or potential to engage in this area based on any experiences in the industry? So if anyone would like to tackle that one question, and I could repeat it as well if anyone needs so.
I think I'll swing the baton again first. I think it's a very good question, and I think it's a very important issue that attention needs to be put on. So Caribbean islands all have, well, most Caribbean islands have proportionately significantly larger marine space than they have land space. I think for Antigua, the ratio is like 1 to 245 or something like that. And this blue economy is a rapidly advancing topic. What I hope is going to happen is that, unlike in the past, that what we say in Antigua is that we actually put the horse before the cat. Like, we actually do the research and try and understand what's currently impacting the deep ocean, because a lot of our activities currently do impact the deep ocean. We just don't see it, right? But every time that there's been expeditions, there've always been evidence of stuff that we're doing in shallow water on land that's impacting deep oceans. And what I hope is that we don't make the steps that lead to deep ocean exploration without actually doing the relevant baseline work. It's not that I think it's a bad thing. I think there's a lot of potential for deep ocean economies and deep sea ecosystems, but I think we need to ensure that we are exploring it appropriately. And in the question of capacity and potential to engage, we do have the potential to engage, and I think there is more than enough collaborative agencies out there where young people, like ourselves can study this kind of topic, especially now that there's more interest. But it also means that we have to involve more universities and ensure that the relevant data is being collected. So whether this means University of the West Indies now start to think about more that aspect of research because jobs are going to be coming up in that field is something that needs to be looked at. But I really do hope that as a region, we understand that the deep ocean affects us all and that we actually do the relevant research prior to just going haywire and mining and exploring and digging. Because what we've seen for all our coastal ecosystems is that it's a lot harder to fix it and it's a lot easier to manage it when it's healthy. And so we've always been fixing, we've always destroyed something or reduced the health and then trying to bring it back. And what I hope is in this case, we actually try and manage it as appropriately while still getting the appropriate benefits from it. So that's my answer to that question.
So I just want to add to, the not knowing. There's a lot of deep sea areas that has not been explored. We don't know what exists there and we need to know. And we don't have the capacity. I don't think we have the capacity in the region in terms of the types of vessels and equipment and so forth. So we need to have those partnerships to find out what exists not only within our boundary, but in areas beyond national jurisdiction. We now have the new treaty, the BBNJ. And so we really need a lot of cooperation, but we need to know what's there before, as my colleague said, we go crazy and try to exploit and then try to fix after. Yeah.
Thank you both for sharing that. The team also said thanks. I don't know if there's any additional questions. I'll just keep the floor open for the chat. If you would like to ask a question directly to the presenter, you could also use the raise hand feature here on Zoom and I'll just pass it over to you. Not sure if you have any additional questions before we close out. Okay, suppose not. Sometimes we're shy. That's all right. This is recorded and of course we'll be sharing this with all the participants as well. And again, now it's nice to put a face to a name when we come across some of the work in your individual islands, so to know that okay, this is the work being done. I know this is a link for the youths, so some of the research institutes or TNC, this is the first link. So hopefully a little less shy the next link. Well, if you have no more questions, then I will also pass it over to my colleague at Simone is here. 1 second. She's also on the steering committee. So 1 moment, let me go ahead and ask her. Go ahead, Simone.
Hi, afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I just have a quick question. So today we spoke, I joined late, but I know the conversation was about coastal ecosystem and their conservation. I just wanted to pose a question to the panel. I know that conservation, sometimes the conversation around it tends to focus heavily on the utilitarian aspects of these different ecosystems, such as the ecosystem services and the coastal protection services. And, I guess as somebody who's very interested in connection between people and nature, I feel as though sometimes the non-utilitarian aspects, such as, those spiritual connections, recreational, those types of things are kind of missed. And I guess I see them as opportunities for telling stories and engaging persons, especially young people, who may be interested in learning about these ecosystems, especially young people who are part of coastal communities and are already part of underserved communities. So that was just one thought, but the question I want to ask is, what do you think, what are your thoughts on what can be done to engage young people more in the conservation conversation? What is being done, or what gaps exist, and what do you think can?
So let's see, so I will start. So you have to meet young people where they are. And a lot of young folks, I mean, they're not like before. They're not going to read the newspapers. They're not going to read a long article. They're all into the social media stuff. So you have to use a lot of social media to reach them. You know the social media stuff better than me. I know Facebook is not as popular anymore, but Instagram and so forth. So you have to now look at different ways and means to be able to engage with young people. They like things quick, they like things fast, that, so that way. But I just wanted to say, if we're gonna have, this is your future, right? You now have to take responsibility for the world that you want to live in. And you have to become meaningfully engaged, right, in the management. And what I mean by that is that many times in our communities and our societies, we put politicians and we put people, and we think it's their responsibility to do what is necessary. We need them to do what is in our best interest. So advocacy is important. And for you to be meaningfully engaged, you have to be educated. So of course, seeking education, finding out, learning, coming to institutions like the IMA, we have a library, we have folks, getting yourself educated and getting yourself involved and engaged to make a positive difference, because this is your future we're talking about here. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I also think it's critical to, as you said, meaningful engagement. You have to take hold of this. You have to let your voices be heard, but you also have to have a seat at the table. And if you don't have a seat at the table, there's no way that what you want to bring to the forefront, what you think your vision for your community is going to be heard. But going back to the platforms, it's quite interesting because my daughter, I might not look as if I have a daughter, but I do. I have a teenager. And they are all on IG and TikTok and all these things. And her thing is sports. And a few weeks ago, the Nature Conservancy, TNC, tagged the US football women's soccer team. And then she came back and I'm like, oh my God, I'm following TNC now and I'm doing this and TNC's posting this and TNC's. And I'm like, but I've been working with TNC for years. Didn't you know that we do fabulous work all over? But it's so interesting what it is that caught her and her generation through the Instagram and what they likes and all that sort of thing. So it's just kind of understanding where they are, where their mindsets are, because you mentioned they wouldn't read newspapers right now. I have not seen a newspaper myself in quite a while, but just kind of understanding where they are. But advocacy is important as well, but also having that pulse on the ground. Sometimes we put things out there on posts, etc. But for me, having that human interaction, sometimes you walk through. What were we doing? CMOS farming, I think it was, a few years ago. This is just when COVID was getting ready to wrap up. And for us in the particular area we worked is normally the older women that were doing it. And so interesting, we were walking around and a couple of young ladies came and like, what are y'all doing? We were like, well, we're putting together this project and they're going to be doing CMOS farming. And they're like, oh my God, that's so interesting. My grandmother used to do that, but I didn't want to do it her way anymore. I'm looking for new techniques, new way of getting a lot, I would say, bang for my buck right now. So as Juman mentioned, they like things quickly. But they're also looking at different avenues of getting what they want quickly, but also getting a lot more out of it. So we also have to be creative in thinking about our method of engagement with them, but also just encouraging them if that education is important, but having that seat at the table, really understanding, if you want to be an advocate, really understanding what you're advocating for and how your voice can lead to significant change is important as well.
So those two contributions were so amazing. It's very hard for me to follow. The only two things I'd say to add to that is that I look at youth in two separate groups. First of all, when you go into schools and you have talks, especially with very young children, I find that when you talk about environments and ecosystems by making the relation to things in their backyard and things that they can go out and see every day, it hits home a lot more. So instead of going out and talking about a lion chasing a gazelle, you're going out and talk about how a cockroach is being eaten by a lizard or something like that. And I find when they make that linkages, it becomes a lot more important to them, and it strikes home more because it's no longer this abstract concept. It's something that they can go and see and touch and feel. The other aspect that I would say to the older young group is that what I've seen from work in different environmental agencies is local young people with the qualifications are valued more than the persons who don't have the background, the baseline background of living in the area. So all of us from the Caribbean know that there are little nuances and little things that you won't get. There's some things you just can't learn in school. There's things that you get from growing up in an area, from understanding the local situation. And what I've found is more and more people put an emphasis on experts who have that local context, not just from a national, regional perspective, but even on the global scale, when you look at the CBD, IPBES, etc., they want experts from the region who can make that connection with the educational knowledge and the actual lived experiences. And so what I would say is that there are more and more opportunities, I think, out there. And it's always one of the big things. You go and talk to a state college class and they're like, what's the job market like? And what I said to them is the job market now is better than it was when I was at your age. And if it continues, it'll be better, in the next few years. So there's more and more persons asking for this experience and qualifications from persons who are from the region, because there's this inert aspect to it that we're able to produce that you're not able to replicate other times. And so that's one of the things that I use to encourage young people.
Thank you to all three of you that gave contributions. I think even from my perspective of being a contributor for Belize and GYBN, I was like, okay, write that down. So I think it's quite relevant for us, especially from Simone as well, also on the steering committee. So thank you for sharing each of your individual perspectives on kind of the youth involvement, because it is important for us to have a voice involved as well. There's one more question, and we'll use that to close out this last segment. It's from Ruth Spencer. So I'll go ahead and unmute you, Ruth.
Okay. Hello. I joined late, but I'm glad to be here. So Nealla mentioned about having a seat at the table. And this week, late last week, I started getting a lot of texts and emails from different CSO colleagues in Grenada about their exclusion at a Ramsar Secretariat event that was funded by IKI. And they asked me to take action because, as you know, Grenada ratified the Escazú Agreement, so their access rights are guaranteed. But what made this issue so important is that almost a year ago, Grenada colleagues, I have the letter, been sending communications to the Ramsar Secretariat about what's taking place in their sites, and they have not gotten any feedback or communications. I had a one-on-one talk with the Secretary General, still nothing has been done. But this last posting really got me concerned, and I spoke to the past German ambassador. He sent communication to the embassy in Trinidad. They're going to do follow-up, and they also got information on the complaint mechanism that IKI, the funding agency, have. So what I'm trying to say, I'm glad for the bold advocacy of the CSOs in Grenada to complain when they are left out of important decision-making processes, because they're the ones trying to protect, conserve their Ramsar sites. And here you are having a discussion right in their country and they are left out. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention, that CSOs must force, they must be determined to have that seat, to have their voice heard, and to advocate. It's very, very important. And in the other islands, we're here to support you. I mean, I see Rahim on the call, and me and Rahim, you know, met when I was down there working with the CSOs. But it's very important to get your messages out. We are living in a time where environmental destruction cannot be solved overnight with money. We have our natural ecosystems. Let's protect them as they are. No science, no technology, no future types of, you know, technology is going to bring back what God has blessed us with. So I'm glad to be here and glad to see how the youths are taking part in, you know, the conservation for the region. Let's continue to work together. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. All right, so we will go ahead and I'll also pass this over to Tyrell, my colleague, and he will lead us out.
Good afternoon, everyone. So being conscious of time, I will keep this very brief. Thank you so much to the panelists for these exceptionally informative presentations. I just sat here like, wow. It's always good to be reminded of the incredible work that is being done across the Caribbean. So on behalf of the GYBN Caribbean team, I just want to encourage everyone to get engaged with the group and the resources that would be sent out after the webinar. We will include like registration links where if you fit the criteria, you could register for the group, or if you like, you could also pass it on to individuals who you think would be a good fit to be a member of the group. We really do believe in empowering young people from across the region to be part of these conversations on biodiversity and how they could play a role in protecting the region's natural resources. This webinar series is just one of the initiatives that we will be taking over time. In the coming weeks and months, you will learn of more ideas and opportunities that we'll be presenting in terms of capacity building. So look forward to some many virtual courses and so on from the GYBN Caribbean team. If you are a member and you are subscribed to our list, you know, weekly we send out some opportunity alerts. So you could also feel free to, you know, utilize those resources. And I see my colleague Simone would have put the registration link in the chat as well. So Carolee, I will pass it back to you now to continue doing an incredible job.
Thanks, Tyrell. Again, just echoing our gratitude on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network for just, you know, sharing your time with us for Biodiversity Matters. I think one of the most important bottom lines, as I've been singing about all morning or afternoon, has really been about our vulnerabilities and our potential for resilience as well as a region seen in collaboration. And it's not just an issue that needs to be tackled in isolation. So I think that's a great note to end off today's webinar series, that together, especially as youths, our voices and our actions are much, much louder when it comes to meaningful engagement in the management of these resources. So I would like to thank Mr. Ruleo, Ms. Nealla, and Dr. Juman for joining us today. And of course, everyone else in the chat as well. We've had great participation so far, and we look forward to continuing this webinar series as well. So, oh, and happy International Day for the Conservation of Mangroves before we leave off, just because I said it in the beginning, but you know, now that we kind of go out and tackle this issue in each of our respective islands and countries, I think that's a nice reminder as well. So if anyone has any questions, we could also be reached by email. If not, then everyone can enjoy their Friday and the rest of their weekend as well. So thank you, everybody. Have a good one.